Okay, I think we will get going. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, the people who are online as well. I'm Vanessa de Andreotti. I am the Dean of the Faculty of Education here at the University of Victoria. And today we have the pleasure of having a visitor. Nora Bateson is here for a conversation, but also to present her book, Combining. In the beginning, but I will start this gathering with an acknowledgement that UVic is located on the unceded ancestral lands of the Songhees and Esquimalt indigenous peoples, also other ʷəŋən nations, especially the Husseinich nation has a special relationship with this land. And as a dean, I have an enormous responsibility to meet the aspirations of First Nations peoples and other indigenous peoples as well, who are putting their lives on the line to protect the biodiversity and forests like the Amazon. So we have all these connections and these responsibilities that we need to fulfill as a Faculty of Education as well. So there's also an acknowledgement of the land as a living entity, the fact that our ancestors probably have conspired for us to be here today. There's the acknowledgement of everything that has made it possible for us to be together, including all the systemic and structural violence that we have in front of us and we have inherited and that we also contribute to and the fact that we're this big family of human and non-human beings that is currently in a lot of distress. So there's a lot of violence inflicted towards the land that we're inflicting towards each other. So I would like to invite us all to be in this space together with the intention of figuring out how to heal the disease that is causing this separation, that is taking us, placing us on a path of premature extinction, agonizing extinction in slow motion, possibly. So it's high stakes. And yeah, so I'll pass it to Nora, who will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we will have a conversation at a kitchen table.
Hello. It's wonderful to be here. It's funny that this is a sort of a presenting of the book because actually I don't bring a copy. And Vanessa did bring a copy, so maybe you have copies. But I want to talk a little bit about what is in Combining and the work that led up to it, which is, well, I could say it's a couple of decades of work, but I could also say it's a few generations of work. And to talk about that so that when Vanessa and I are in conversation, we can really draw from that place instead of, from the sort of chapter by chapterness of it, which you can discover on and enjoy on your own. But let's go back to Combining. So Combining was not supposed to be the book that I wrote. It was supposed to be a book on warm data. And warm data is a concept that I have been working with for a while, I think 11 or 12 years now. And I was going to write a book about warm data. Now, I should have known better, but somehow I kept getting cornered into this request to write a book about warm data. I'm going to tell you what warm data is in just a second. And that was, of course, a mistake. Then it came that the book was actually called Combining. Warm data is defined as transcontextual information. Information that's produced between and among contexts. Or an easy way to think of it, which is probably actually the harder way to think of it, as information that's alive. What is information that's alive? This is an important question because if the information that we are deriving and producing to respond to a crisis and a multi-crisis, a polycrisis, a meta-crisis that is happening in a living, moving, complex world, and the information is not also moving, it's not going to sync up. It's going to give us partial information. So what is information that's alive? That was not my initial question coming into this, but it's what has stewed over time. When I came into this concept of warm data, it started with the predicament of trying to do research on a complex living system. And the research question that I had at that time was, how do systems get unstuck? I was looking around and I saw many stuck systems. And when I saw these stuck systems, I brought together a team of people, and we started with that as our research question. Fast forward, it wasn't a good research question. It wasn't a good research question because when you're looking at a system that is in motion, okay, whether it's a family or a forest or a society or a culture, the stuck bits can only remain stuck if there is lots of movement on the peripherals. It takes a lot of movement to hold something still. Okay, think about when you walk across a room and you're holding a very full bowl of soup, right? You have to be able to absorb and move to keep that thing still, right? In the same way that so many natural, the places in the environment, in the ecology, but also peoples around the world have had to absorb the changes and the exploitation to keep the economy stable, right? To hold something still, to keep the education system in place, to keep the hospitals and the health system with the same thinking so it doesn't have to change. Lots of things have to change around them. So it wasn't a good question. So having worked out that it wasn't a good question, we went forward with it. Because, you know, so the best example that we could come up with of a stuck system was to look at the body in paralysis. Okay, so now I want to be very clear. I have absolutely no background in working with paralysis. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a neuroscience scientist. But what we were interested in is the study of how stuckness moves in one kind of context, one configuration of a complex system, so that we might learn something about how stuckness moves in other configurations. What could we learn from the study of paralysis that would help us to figure out, looking at other stuck systems, like the education system, like many economic and other culturally bound systems? So the idea was to look at this. And I found this remarkable clinic in Italy that was doing really interesting work. Some of it was informed by my dad, some not. My father, Gregory Bateson, was in the sort of the beginning, the forefront of systemic thinking in Western academy, in Western science. Let it be known, this was in indigenous and ancient cultures all along. So he didn't make it up. This was just the introduction of this thinking into this paradigm. So in this clinic, what I saw happened really shifted my understanding of this question: what is information? So I'm going to ask you to imagine that there is actually a chalkboard. Can I move with this? Okay, I'm going to draw so that the people online can see. A little wooden block. Okay, it was very small. like you hold it in your hand, but you're over there, so I'm drawing it big. And in the middle of this block, there was a spiral. And this spiral was carved in, okay? Just a little spiral carved into a block, right? Now, it's not an accident that the spiral is actually a deep imprinting of actually life, okay? So the practitioner worked with the person who was paralyzed. Now, one of the features of paralysis is a frozen arm, a sort of tucked in arm, a hand that's clenched. And what I saw was nothing having to do with addressing the arm. Nobody was massaging it. Nobody was pinging it or pressing it or stretching it or moving it or anything. Okay, so I want you to notice that. What they were doing was they had this little block and they said to the person with the paralysis, what would it feel like, hypothetically, to move your finger around that spiral? Okay, what would it feel like, without touching it, what would it feel like to move your finger around that spiral? There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, but the person begins to try to say what it would feel like. Well, I would feel the wood and I would feel the temperature and I would feel it on the edge and I would feel my shoulder move and I would feel, right? And in that process, what I want you to notice is that in order to do that, many different systems of cognition have to combine. Okay, so this is visual, this is tactile, this is memory, right? Well, I've done it before, what would it feel like? This is communication with the person they're with. What are they looking for? What language are they looking for? So it's also linguistic. It's the making of words, but you can't do that without assessment of also the context of the clinic. What's the right answer? What's the wrong answer? So these are several different systems of cognition. And then the next step is the practitioner would take the person's hand and move it, help them, the hand that was the non-frozen hand, and move it very slowly around the spiral and ask a question. Now, the question they asked was not, what did you feel? The question they asked is, what was the difference? Okay, do you see what happens there? In that question, they have to think about three things: what they felt, what they thought they felt, and how to describe it. So this is another whole combining in three different layers simultaneously. Okay, they haven't touched the arm. So this is one of many things that they were using. And what I started to ask here is, what are they seeing as the pathology? All right, if you see the frozen arm as the pathology, you start addressing the arm. So clearly, there's nothing attached to the arm. There's no beeping things. There's no wires. There's no buzzing. There's no, what are they seeing? And the response really moved me into working in a whole different way. The response was, pathology is an organism's inability to make sense of its world. Okay, so what they were doing was inviting the organism to make combinings in very unique ways. The way one patient makes those combinings, totally different than the way the next one does. What's happening there? So then I realized, okay, we are asking the wrong question. We knew that. The question that we really want to be asking is not how do systems get unstuck, but how do systems learn? All right, how do systems learn? Because that's what was happening, is that they weren't recuperating or returning the people back to their original cognitive processes. They were allowing the cognitive processes to recombine and find new ways of making sense of themselves. That's a very different approach to healing. Super exciting. Super exciting. And a fantastic way to think about how we go into these other contexts. So, how do systems learn? All right. When you learn to play violin, where's the learning? Is it in your muscles? Is it in your intellect? Is it in your emotive connection with the music? Is it cultural? Is it in the relationship to this instrument and the history of that artisanship? Is it in relationship to your violin teacher? Is it classical? Is it bluegrass? Is it blues? What are you playing? Where's the learning? It's in the combining. But when we go to research that, one of the things that happens is we look at, oh, well, this is what we see in the muscles. This is what we see in the intellect. This is what we see in the relationship to the professor or the teacher. This is what we see in the emotional development. This is what we see here, that there, and what have we done? We have actually made it impossible to, and we've obscured totally the very process that allows this remarkable feat of being alive and making music, right? As ancient as the spiral. So where's the information? If we're going to do research in another way, we're going to have to really ask a different question, which is, how do we deal with that kind of information? Because it moves. If you look at the information from the position of the muscles and you look at it from the direction of the emotion, you're going to see something different than if you look at the muscles from the direction of the intellect, or the intellect from the emotions, or the emotion. So everything's changing everything. And you see this in particular on those days when you get a big learning in one context that's surprisingly brought about by some strange associative process in another context, right? You can play all the notes, but it's not till your heart breaks that you can play the song, right? So this was the place where I started to think, this is what warm data is. And the reason this is important is that it gives us a way to begin to enter this movement, the combining movement of multiple processes simultaneously that are changing each other, which boggles the mind, okay? It's a mind boggler. It's not going to fit in our usual way of thinking about information. And yet, it's where everything happens. That's where falling in love happens. That's where respect and disrespect happens. That's where culture happens. When you meet somebody and they connect with you. How did that happen? So most of the things we look at as decisions, as various, great big life moving processes are actually happening in the warm data. And yet there's nowhere to put it down. So I am not saying that I do not hold value in reductionism and reductionist information. This is absolutely essential and it's very necessary. But what I am saying is there is a virtually untrained muscle needed to begin to perceive and work with another kind of information that's actually, I think, critically important to the possibility of continuing the vitality of life. So the deep separations that have taken place, the habit of pulling things apart so that they could be studied, is deep down in the core of how things, especially our perception of the world and our response to it, have gotten terribly mixed up. in a violent way. I remember learning, looking at some of the stuff that my dad was doing in the early 30s. And his learning in Bali and in New Guinea was coming into being at the same time that fascism was growing in the West. And one of the things that they learned and that they were eager to bring into back with them was the idea that if you separate something, if anything becomes objectified, a person, a people, an organism, an idea, if it becomes objectified, if it becomes removed from its combining world, once it's objectified, it can be exploited. And so what they brought back was a very eager, I mean, they were 25 years old, right? They wanted to stop fascism by bringing a new way of looking at a new science. And it was to be the science of looking at how things come together to produce life. That would later become what we now know of as systems thinking and complexity thinking. But I want you to recognize these, you know, young people very concerned about their world in many of the ways that I think we are today, looking for a new way to make sense of it. Okay, where's the pathology? Where's the pathology? And how might we, you know, my work with the Warm Data Lab, which is a process that we work with groups, is very much based on this same sort of, I think, very elegant question, right? What's remarkable to me about this spiral example is that somebody thought of it. Wow, that's beautiful, right? It's a beautiful way to think about how these systems are coming together. And they don't know they're coming together. They can't see how they're coming together. It's not the same. It might move really quickly one day and not move again. Things can move. We don't know. That doesn't matter. Give it the room. Give it the conditions, right? This is an invitation to a kind of set of conditions that allow for a multiplicity, an ecology of movement and learning to take place. How do we do that in a social way? How do we bring that into the culture? I'll stop there. There's so much I could say, but I'm going to stop there so we can dive in together. All right. So I want you to notice that we have this funny microphone. We were actually offered a real microphone, but then we thought that it was incredibly entertaining, that it would look like we were passing a joint. And as we sit here as a couple of aunties, we want you to not take us too seriously. So I'm going to now pass dear Vanessa the joint.
Yeah. Thank you, Nora, for being here.
Thank you.
We have been talking over the weekend too, and having fun and increase together. But we've been talking about this interruption of intergenerational sharing that used to happen in the kitchen, and where the aunties would be talking about stuff, life notes, right? And sharing what they've learned in their practice, basically, right? So it wouldn't be, we were also playing out with another analogy where we thought about what is it, the rumble in the jungle that you see, which was a famous Muhammad Ali fight, and then it was taken as an analogy for a talk between Jordan Peterson and Zizek a couple of years ago. And it really exemplifies how fights, right, between ideologies, and we were saying, like, that's what the boys do over there. What the aunties do is in the kitchen, And we may be black belts in our martial art, but the idea is to have tea and to be talking. And other people come and go and join and leave. But at 2 in the morning, we were still talking. And we saw young people coming, like we were talking in my house, and it was beyond midnight. And you came up with a reference to Lord of the Rings that was incorrect, we learned from somebody coming out of a sofa saying, that's not the correct quote, right? And so there was a 15-year-old listening in that we didn't even know. We didn't even know he was there, right? So that practice of both listening without having to be addressed, right? So just observing and witnessing, but the aunties at the table, right? And while you are eating or cooking together or having tea. So we both felt that we're missing that. We were talking about elders, elders of complexity, right? So we don't have elders of complexity apart from your dad and all the indigenous people who have not lost that knowledge, but we don't have that context of a table where we can listen in or where we can practice talking as well. So thank you for all the nourishment of the table this weekend. Thank you for being here. So I'll start with your martial arts. So your black belt in warm data. What's the opponent?
I just love you. Thank you so much for having me here. It's wonderful to be here. The opponent, the monster, the ghost, is the ghost of certainty, the ghost of measurement, the ghost of control, the ghost that doesn't feel the violence of the separations when they're made. There's a numbness. And the trick of numbness is you don't feel it. So there's some way in which there's a need to understand that there is a use for absolutely, for there's a time and a place where separations need to be made. But to hold those separations in a very different way than we're holding them. We've been taught to hold them, okay? Even when we say whatever it is, a tree is a tree. A tree is not a tree, right? Vanessa is not Vanessa. Vanessa is lots of ancestry and lots of microbiome and her children and her ideas and her culture and her house and her spouse and her childhood and her old age that hasn't come yet. And so when that relational contextual process that is producing the entity we think we're talking about is obscured from the image and the vocabulary and the measurement and the study, some very weird ideas start to emerge. That you can fix the individual, right? That you can control by fixing the individual. You can fix the system by fixing the individual parts. No way. And so this is part of the opponent. I would say that is the deepest opponent. And it is substantiated and held up by every single institution. And by language itself, I would say, especially English. Yeah, so it's a real task to be attentive to where you're slipping, when it sneaks in, when you forget that the map is not the territory. The thing is not the thing. Vanessa is not Vanessa. And I am not me. And if you want to get mad at me, remember that you're not just getting mad at me. The me that you're getting mad at is lots of things all around me, and I'm participating in them. I'm not off the hook, but it's not just me here. So how we show up, I think, especially in this time, is really important, because the incredible polarization and divisiveness that is premised upon you are that and I am this. And in doing that, we have actually lost multitudes of possibility, so much possibility. I don't know, that's where I would identify the opponent, and the damage, the violation, the violence that has taken place in that way of perceiving the world now leaves us with a phenomenal wound. And the wound itself is not the opponent, but it's here with us as the work. Yeah. How about for you?
Give me the joint. Yeah, no, what you said about the wound not being the opponent is extremely important. And when you have this thing about the attack, right? So when we see people, we're projecting an image of them, which may or may not resonate with the image they have of themselves. But it's this relating to the world through images, and images that are fixed, right, is what's creating a lot of grief. So for example, one of the things I had to learn is that when people look at me, especially like if you're in administration at the university at this time of of everything that is happening, you know that you will have 100 people in your faculty and 100 ideas of who you are, right? And my idea of who I am cannot depend on what other people think of me. My idea of who I am needs to be grounded in this mess that you described that I am. But it is an experience rather than an identity, a formed identity. So once you know you're not just yourself, once you know that you're more than what you can understand even yourself, right? It's important. You ground your identity in something other than a construct, right? And you ground your sense of belonging in something other than human constructs. And then you can navigate a reality where everybody projects onto you, but you can, sometimes you can't navigate that, but so that you are not those projections, and you see projections as projections, and you see your own projections also as projections, as something beyond language, beyond projections. And I think what in my martial art, the movement is very much about getting out of the fixity of language. It's dancing with language. It is breathing another kind of choreography, and allowing the land to bring the song or to bring the dream through you. And that is coming from insights and training with Indigenous communities in the Global South. But if I were to identify an opponent, I would say that from the beginning, I think, my opponent has been denial and deflection of the harm of separation. So I throughout my experience in education, but also as an academic, I've been focusing on how people hold complicity and harm. So generally, when you talk about complicity and harm, social harm, ecological harm, there is within the current psychological structure that we have, there is the moment that this is revealed that we are complicit, we are not pure. We think we are in the good team, but actually everything that we do, from our food, our clothes, everything is part of violent processes, right? So the moment that this happens, people bring it to the personal level. And in the personal level, there is a measurement of worth. So either you are worthy or we are worthless, right? And if you feel that you're worth less, then there's shame and guilt and blame, right? Or self-blame. So that doesn't work for us to be able to sit with what I would call the shit that we need to be composting together. We have to find other layers of being where the fundamental existential layer is not dependent on these calculations, where we can hold the separations that sometimes are necessary while we also hold something that is not separate and will never be, cannot be, because the tethers that bind us to the planet and to each other are not separable. There's no, so, but there are layers of it. So how can we hold at the same time the fact that we are not separable, and then another layer where separation may be necessary, and another layer where there's combining. Otherwise, and combining requires a level of distinction, right? And movement, where we have to be dancing and changing with the matter, the motion, and the mystery of everything. So like the opponent at the end of the day, I think for you and for me, the root opponent is the separate, the fundamental sense, the imposed sense of separation onto something that is not separate. And that is fundamental and existential. It's at the basis of it. And it goes beyond language, and it's in movement. It's matter, motion, and mystery. But we are in a culture and psychological structure where that doesn't fit, right? Because everything needs to be ranked and put in a box. And language does that, and categorizations do that. So I love the idea of a martial art, and mine is probably capoeira, because it's about finding balance in movement. And I think the martial art we're talking about is one that it's about neutralizing the opponent, not beating them up, right? Like I don't think boxing is a martial art, but, or maybe it is. I have no idea how they, which is, yeah, I don't, maybe it's a game. Is it an Olympic game? I don't know. But it's not that. Basically, it's not about competition. It is about figuring out how we can dance and move and live in a way that recognizes the tethers, while also being able to interrupt the violence, right? While you're doing that. So I would like to ask you to talk about movement, because I think that's a conversation that we've had that has been extremely useful. Here's your joint.
Oh, movement. So I have, for a long time, been working with complexity, ecology, systems thinking, you know, the Western versions of this. And there's wonderful and rigorous material that's out there that's really important on these topics. And there's something that is frustratingly missing, and that is movement. And it becomes very difficult to model the way that this creates movement, the way that life moves, the way that organisms shape each other, the way that communication between family members is shaped between them and in relationship to the culture, the economy, the health, all these different contexts are coming into play. So where is the movement? And there's one kind of movement that's like, I'm going to move this across the table, okay? This type of movement is largely what is in the world around what does change making look like, okay? Here it is, I can see it, I can grab it, I can move it. I did it. There it is, it's moved. You can measure it, you can document it, I did it. But what's happening in that movement Where is that movement? Where is the movement happening when you're learning to play violin? Where is that movement? Because it's not conscious. You're not really in charge of how your muscles are informing your brain, or your heart is changing your muscles. Sorry, you're not really in charge. Where is that movement? It's not just yours either, because it's filled with memories and sensations of life that come from generations. And when you say to someone, you need to be respectful of something, it's not like this. It doesn't, you cannot make it happen in the same way, because those processes are living in some other place that is actually largely invisible, beyond our ability to perceive, let alone control. So movement for me, and in the work that I'm doing, is actually all I'm looking for. It's just movement. If we can get one tiny thing moving, the other things have to move in other ways. And that starts to begin the configuration of shifting. But the way that it works in the warm data work is approached in a very different way than the way it works in your work. And I think the two are really interesting together. So I'm looking at the way in which impressions and memories and experiences are combining into notions of identity and all these things, but are combining in ways that are not looked for and not found. In the sense that as they are in the unseen, okay, so much work that's been in the past premised on the unseen has been about bringing what's unseen out into the open so you can see it. All right, there's a time to do that and a time not to do that. What are those times? Like, I'm really interested in exploring that with you, because there are ways in which when you illuminate something for me and I think, oh, wow, I never saw that before, right? That's fantastic. And then that allows things to shift in unseen ways. And other times that things need to not be illuminated, because when they get illuminated, they become a thing. And then you're talking about a thing that is no longer something that is forming and moving and shifting. So there's a way in which there is a world that we shouldn't uncover, right? Evolution shows us that wild animals, wild organisms, wild plants have the information in them to change, to respond to each other in ways that they weren't planning on. All right. An organism is mostly in its survival by a repetition of engagements with various other organisms that it's in interdependency with. The hitch is all those organisms are changing. So if the organism doesn't change, it becomes obsolete. How does it know how to change? Think about that. Where is that information? Domestic animals, domesticated plants don't have that ability, that flexibility, this cache of unseen information. So sometimes when unseen information, when you yank it up out of the ground, like a carrot that's not grown yet, and you give it a name, all right, one of the things that happens is that it can't move anymore. And the understanding of that, the perception of that carrot, only falls into that which is in the organism's current ability and habit of perceiving, right? The current ability and habit of perceiving. So the example that I usually use in the warm data class is that I'm a California kid. I grew up on the hillsides of California. I'm very able to, let's hope I don't regret these words, perceive a rattlesnake, okay? Not because I can perceive the rattlesnake. It's because I know the forest. It's because I know the shale. It's because I know the patterns of the dappled light. Therefore, I can see the difference between the snake and the forest. Now, I go to Sweden and I cannot see the moose. And it's not that I don't see a moose. A moose is a very big animal. It's that I don't actually know the forest. So I can't perceive the relational contrasts between the forest and the moose. Right? So I am not within my current ability to perceive. I can't see the darn moose. And if you show me a moose, I will only translate it back into those ways in which I'm used to seeing. If I play you a new piece of music, you will think, oh, this sounds like. If I feed you a new food, oh, this tastes like. If I produce a new idea, oh, that's kind of like, right? That's what we do. So the danger of bringing things up into the light that need to be down in the soil is that they get metabolized into the same thinking that is creating the problem. And I think we've seen this quite a bit in multitudes of change-making attempts. Movement. The movement that can happen in the unseen is really different than the movement that can happen in the seen. Both are necessary. Well, how about you? Movement for you.
Thank you.
This is kind of a stony conversation.
It is a stony conversation. I think what's coming up for me in terms of movement that is present in the work that we do with the TDF and facing human wrongs and hospice and modernity is one where we draw attention to relational patterns that are perceived as normal or are normalized and naturalized, but they are actually harmful without people noticing it. But in order to do that, before we can get there, people need to be perceiving the movements within. And they need to, what we call diffract, which is perceive the different parts of themselves, also moving differently. So we have this image of the bus, and it's now a methodology that we invite people to imagine themselves as a bus with a driver, people at the front, people in the middle, people at the back. People at the back, you don't even know who's there, so that there is the sense of indeterminacy and unknowability of the self, right? And those in the front are those that are very loud. They think one thing, they say another, and they feel something else. So you're trying to see the different things that are happening for each passenger, for the driver, between the passengers, what they're saying, how they're beefing or they're in peace. Then we take the metaphor to talk about what's the weather inside, what are you noticing in the air of the room? Is it stuffy? You need to open the windows. What's the weather outside? Where is the bus moving? Is it in a straight line, down a hill, up a hill, caught in a roundabout, falling off a ditch? Things like that give you language to talk about the internal movements that you see, and to also develop a sense of self-compassion for all the parts of you. It's not about, but the interesting thing that I found with the bus, and it enables lots of different things, basically. But one thing is that if you tell people it is about self-compassion from the beginning, the whole exercise changes, because they need to find that for themselves, right? So we don't say that in the beginning. Now it just,
Now you
yeah,
blown
this again. But if you don't say it from the beginning, what happens is that people encounter themselves in a very different way. And then in the beginning, they might not have that compassion, and they want people out of the bus. They are hard on it themselves. And we're trying to give them tools not to do that, to really be able to hold and hold more and hold more. But if they have the epiphany that the exercise is about self-compassion, they own it, right? But if you tell them, then they gear the exercise for self-compassion, which is not actually self-compassion. It's so interesting. This is the thing that most surprised me in this inquiry with the bus. But the bus allows us, and it also allows us to, when we say we're authorizing, right? Authorizing movement. So when the bus is going too fast, sometimes there are passengers who are nauseous. And sometimes they have to say, stop everything, I need to throw up. And then we ask people, are you ready to help in the sacred task of holding the vomit bucket, right? So we make the vomit a vomit. We make the holding of the vomit a sacred thing, and then the taking of the vomit to the land a sacred thing as well. So it's creating a ritualistic, metaphorical container so that we can have relationships where complexity is not only in, it's there, it's natural. There are different decks of the bus then. When people get the practice of the first one, the first deck, they start talking about the passengers on that bus. And so I would be talking to you and saying, there's a passenger on my bus who is saying this, who is really bugging me. And he's annoying. I don't like what it's doing, but that's what's coming up. So I can bring something difficult to the table without losing face and without putting my whole being and the coherence of the Cartesian subject behind that force, right? I see there's a part of me here that's bugging me, or there's a conversation on my bus that needs to be work through with you. Can you come in the bus and be one of the passengers? So you can talk about contradiction. We can talk about paradox. You can talk about tension in a very, very different way. You can have a vomit even, as long as you know it's as long as there's consent in holding the bucket. So it allows for different movements that languages grounded on separability and the Cartesian and also logocentrism, right? That the indexing of reality in language, they don't allow for that because you have to be coherent, you have to be certain, you have to have control of, and it's about winning the conversation, of convincing or arguing or agreeing with others. And in this, it becomes a mess. And once people are used to that mess, we introduce the other decks of the bus. We say, okay, there's a deck of the bus where your ancestors, all your ancestors are there, past, present, and future. And wait for that. And they can come down and talk to you and talk to other people through you. Then there's another deck where there is all of humanity, not just you, and they're part of your bus. And there's the good, the bad, the ugly, the broken, the messy, and the messed up over there. So how do you relate to that? And then there's another deck where there's both humanity and non-humanity. And and then we introduce decks that are like, all the species we've driven to extinction are there too. And what are they, how are they communicating? What is moving in that, right? So, and then we also say that it doesn't have to be a bus. It can be any image that has two things: plurality and movement. And sometimes you get like an ecology is in movement, right? Some people go for an orchestra, it's in movement. The stars, a constellation is in movement. I say generally, spaceship full of chipmunks could be a good one, because the more you laugh at it, and sometimes you have the spaceship coming to the bus. Another interesting thing with this is that people want images they can identify with. So they say, oh, bus, it's too mechanical, I don't like a bus. And I'm like, okay, then a canoe, whatever works for you, my friend. But the thing is that we're also used to preference. And now I'm starting to say plurality, movement, and a level of dissonance with that image, right? Otherwise, you're going to try to curate whatever is in there according to your preference. And you need that dissonance. It cannot be about identification and disidentification.
So that really, yes, I love that. And I'm so excited about that. So and you've been in a warm data lab, so you can, I'm sure, see the parallels there. There are, so one of the ways that a warm data lab works very similarly is that you move from context to context in these conversations in which at first you might think that what's happening in the room is the conversation. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is you're moving between different versions and memories and impressions of yourself and your own life. Different passengers occurring in different relationships. Who can I be when I'm with you? Who can I be when I'm with you? Who can I be when I'm with you? Not the same person. I'm finding different people on my bus, right? And when you say something, it might like irritate one of the people on my bus. I might fall in love with, one of the people on your bus. But the space is open for this multiplicity because you cannot perceive those differentiations without the dissonance, without the different inputs. So that is when in this thing, when the question is not what did you feel, but what's the difference, right? And that difference, that's relational information. Right. So when you're talking about the different people on the bus, the different people in the different chipmunks on the spaceship, you're giving complexity a place. And that is hard to conceptualize, maybe, but you do it anyway. We do it anyway. And so it's about recognizing what kinds of configurations of complexity we've become familiar with. Not that we can or can't perceive complexity, that we do that. You can't help it. If you can be with a dog or take a walk in a forest or make love or listen to a piece of music, if you can eat food, you can do complexity. You are doing it. But what are the super familiar, entrained, habituated conversations, if you want to have it in that way, with the people on the bus that, and that's where I love this idea of calling attention to those conversations, those patterns, and saying, watch out for this one. Careful, this one bites. And that makes I love that. That's really beautiful. I'm looking at this clock thing here and realizing that we were gonna yeah.
bring that too.
Yeah. Let me say one more thing.
Just one more thing. What came to me when you're talking was, so there's one of the things that we say with the bus too, is that if you can't hold space for the complexity inside of you, and hold space means, what does it mean actually?
What
It's
does it mean?
what does it mean? It's being present without collapsing layers
I like the idea of making room too.
and making room.
Making room is a nice.
Yeah, what did he say? Like it was Rasmus.
Yeah, he
thing?
said, make room, not remedy.
Make room, not remedy. So don't try to fix.
Don't try to fix it.
Make more room. Yeah, make more room.
Which I think
Yeah,
what both
it-
of us are
yep,
doing.
it's
because
good.
You don't know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what you're going to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Like that thing, you don't know where the learning's going to happen. You don't know,
Yes.
but you make room. Sorry.
No.
Go ahead.
No. You can have it.
That's
It's
right.
our
That's
joint.
that's
But
our
okay.
joint.
So there's something that happens in education that is to do with, it's not that we don't live complexity, we can't avoid it, but how we're making meaning out of it is super problematic.
Super.
And part of what education does, like formal education within modernity, is that it teaches us to be in the room with all the complexity, and then we collapse and we impose a language on it of coherence. And we edit out what doesn't fit in the language of coherence, and we police the borders. And in a context of hypercomplexity, where things are changing faster, that becomes a pressure cooker situation, right? Where it actually taking, like pressure cookers explode, that's the kitchen wisdom.
Lentils everywhere.
Lentils everywhere. And they often do if you don't know what to do with that pressure cooker, but safely releasing that. And I think what you said about pay attention to problematic patterns and trying to map and to really take a step back and look at the problematic relational patterns that we're repeating without noticing, because they have been normalized, they have been naturalized, they have been rewarded even, right? And it's because you can't say that I'm fixing that. There's no way to fix that, but you can invite a possible interruption, right? So you say, this is this pattern causes that. It's up to you. Like, if you want better relations based on deeper manifestations of trust, respect, reciprocity, accountability, consent, compassion, and kindness, there are other options that we are not seeing here, right? And that figuring that out through inquiry, through collective, but it has to be a compassionate inquiry, because if you can't make mistakes, if you can't use that word, and then if you use it, you're going to be canceled, it's not going to go anywhere, right? So that's preventing us from collaborating and combining in ways that are unexpected. We are now in a rehearsed like a swing or a seesaw of it's either this or that. It's either this or that. And if that not that, I cancel. Or if not this, it has to be its opposite. All of this is to do with a training of thinking in Cartesian, anthropocentric, logocentric, teleological, allochronic, universalist, reductionist thinking. And if we continue only with that kind of narrative, it's terminal, because it only leads to a politics of entitlements to more entitlements. And what we need right now is a politics of responsibility to more responsibility, which involves restraint, which involves compassion, which involves holding compassion in one hand and accountability in the other. So figuring out how to invite people into a process rather than force or shame them or blame them into a that doesn't work. It has to be an uncoercive rearrangement of our desires and relationships.
To get unstuck.
To get unstuck. I think we're ready to open it up.
So, yes. So we wanted to invite you not to necessarily ask questions that we would answer, because that structure is actually part of the problem. So what we would like to invite you to do is, if it's a question, it's a question. If it's just an idea, it's an idea. And then we'll riff on it a little. How about that? Instead of, yeah, but don't expect any answers. But riffing, we can supply riffing, yeah.
That's what aunties do.
That's what we've been doing, yeah. So, yeah, feel free. And what about the online people? Can they riff with us?
But,
yeah.
So if we have questions from here, we will just repeat the question there.
Yeah.
If we have questions here, maybe Jasdeep?
Yeah, I'm happy to represent.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, so a question that's come up. How would you, Nora, relate emergence to combining? And that can be a point of conversation for the room.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now I have to, in this moment, check my habituated patterns. Okay, I have been asked a question, and everything in my conditioning says that I'm sitting at the front of the room and I need to provide an answer. All right, so here I am trying to actually witness that.
What does your body want to do?
My body's like, woo, woo, I want to go this way, you're going that way, right? So it's a very strong response. And you addressed me, so maybe the first thing I should do is hand Vanessa the mic. That's one possibility. Another thing is to say, I am in an emergent process with working with this question that you have asked me. I'm in this emergent moment trying to work out how to respond without falling into the usual Q&A pattern. And what I'm really looking at is And feeling is all of the submerging of the last probably 150, 200, maybe 400 years of this idea of expert, teacher, Q&A, this whole thing that if someone asks you a question, you provide an answer. And the trickery of that. So what's in that submerging is what I'm feeling. And so this is for me, what's in the combining is in recognizing how all of those experiences are right here with me as I try to think about a response that is actually somewhere in my own wandering and that is actually coming from my bones and not necessarily from my inner dictionary, which I could provide you. I could spew out an answer to that question that I've rehearsed for a decade. And how to not do that is actually kind of fascinating.
So one of the things I learned with the Hudnikwi people in the Amazon, and here with many Indigenous people too, in Indigenous education, we do have a very good department of Indigenous education, is that Indigenous ways of teaching about complexity are not direct. So they're not based on a concept of emergence or adaptability or whatever, leverage points. It is about the living of it, right? And because it's about the living of it, if somebody asks a question and it's a good question, the role of the teacher is to create the conditions so that the person has their own epiphany.
I'm hoping
may have created the conditions. We have created the conditions for the epiphany.
Right.
So it's not a question and answer thing, which is this is a kind of a more Western philosophy approach. The approach is creating conditions for it's collective inquiry and creating conditions for epiphany. So my question then is, like, if you're thinking about the capoeira black belt teacher, I don't think there's black belts in capoeira, by the way, but if we're thinking about there's something about the teacher, right? And the student in Western culture, it's either teacher-centered or student-centered. And Gert Pesta, who is one of the educational philosophers that I really respect, he talks about the possibility of being taught by the world, about being present to the world, rather than projecting onto the world or withdrawing from the world, being present to the world, worlding. And what kind of teaching is necessary for that? So what kind of teaching is necessary in the capoeira for the dance itself, right? Because the dance is not teachable. It's not choreographed movements. It's something you have to train your muscles to respond to something that is there and that's fast. And if you're too stuck, you're going to get knocked. And if you're too fast, you also fall, right? So how do you train the muscles to be in the dance with things without, and it's by doing for sure, but it's also by observing people who have been doing it for longer, who have learned certain things about the move that are patterns, and you have learned to be at the edge of these patterns, right? So at the same time that I want to question the teacher and the student, I want to keep the notion of depth, right? And of experience and reverence for that. Because it can't be that just everybody, it's super horizontal, everybody's at the same level. And then we have to stay with the lowest common denominator. And then what happens to us here who have been in this for some time, observing the patterns, is that we're asked to translate to the basics all the time. And then to a point where we don't even have time anymore to dance, right? Which is what the kitchen table is about. So we need to breathe in so that we can remember how fun it is to dance too. But when everybody else, others are asking, how do I bring what you're saying to my company or whatever on school on Monday. And I'm like, it's not my problem. It's like,
Well, I mean, actually, though, it's the question I think that I'm playing with right now. And I loved having that question directed directly at me and having it be a question that I know I have written about, and I like, ooh, the temptation was super strong. And to live in that for just a minute, because it was fun. Right. And I have never actually been in an on-stage situation and played with that before. So it was really kind of interesting. What I'm thinking about is second order, nth order ways of being in this place of having done this for a long time. What is the invitation? Like, what is the invitation that is the response, that is not the answer to the question, but it's the invitation to the movement, right? Because the information that I could transmit is it's a little bit like a potato chip, you know, and you could eat it.
it's sugar.
Yeah, but
Candy.
so you talk a lot about compost. All right, so one of the things about compost is that you don't eat it.
Basic.
Basic, don't eat the compost, right? So if we are producing compost here for you,
That's very important.
right,
Yes.
don't eat it. Let it mulch and move and heat and storm and open seeds that are your seeds, your mulch, your movement. Then see what grows out of it, right? So there's that thing of how do we, you know, be in the compost in a way that allows for second, third order process to take place. It's a wonderfully challenging thing. Yeah.
It's interesting when you're saying don't eat it. We should have rules of composting, because one of the ones that when we talk about collective, historical, systemic shifts, so when we hold all of that, and we're talking about colonialism and slavery, genocides, ecocides, everything, we find pools in the middle of like humidity pools of sadness, of anger, and it's important not to drown in it.
Don't drown.
Don't drown.
Compost.
Don't drown in the compost. Don't eat the
eat the
compost. We will find the other ones, the other ones in there. And I think it is to do with the market too, right? And how complexity is emerging in the market and how it has to become part of a package. And I can understand why this is sometimes the only way. So for example, thinking about UVic and everything we're going through, all the layers of complexity and the change and the cuts and encampments and maybe somebody coming up, a consultant coming in with a package saying, this is emergence, this is adaptability, this is like, this is this paradigm, this is the other paradigm. It might help. I'm not discounting that, but it's different from the living of it. Like it's how is there any other entry point that is not packaged?
This is why I started doing warm data labs, because the language of the complexity is not the complexity. The language of the VUCA is not the VUCA. You can talk VUCA and you can use the language of complexity, but that's not the same thing. And so what I have been really, I mean, after trying to quote unquote teach complexity for many years, I finally realized that most of the people were leaving the room not much better off than they came into it. And the ones that so quote unquote got it already had it before they came in. So the transmission system was faulty, seriously faulty. And because it didn't really matter. I mean, you know, when you live in a world in which everything is a tool, is a process, is an efficiency, is a cause, is an effect, is a product, then that very delicate, vital process that I was trying to describe just did the thing I was talking about. It landed in the existing metabolism of ways of perceiving and got metabolized as such. Right? So the next thing you know, McKinsey's using complexity in every one of their brochures as a buzzword. And I'm thinking, oh no, we've just, we worked hard for that word. Now what are we going to do? What are we going to use in its place? So with warm data, one of the things that I see happening is that, which is a lot like your bus, is that people begin to perceive complexity through their own memories, their own life. So the experience of the complexity is actually embodied. Then when we say, here's the theory, they're like, yeah, I feel that here. It's living there. And it works the other way too, of looking at, you know, the first thing that always happens to me, I don't know if it happens to you, is this thing of, well, how can I use this in my work? I need to use this in my coaching, in my, you know, therapy, in my whatever it is I do. So I'm here because I want to learn a professional tool. Yeah, no. I mean, the thing is, if you jump to there, you miss the actual shifting learning process. I mean, what I would hope is that through my work or your work, that what is changing is not this or that or this or that. All right, what is coming up for you today is not this or that or this or that. It's some premise level thing that actually shifts everything. Right? So I'm always like, you don't expect to get anything out of this because what you're going to get is everything. There is no anything. You're going to get everything. And so, but that won't happen if you jump directly to your professionalism. It has to go through you, your memories, your bones, your complicity, your way of being in the world. I remember my daughter calling me in tears and saying, Mama, how do I be a good person? Every single thing that I do in a day is attached to all of the exploitation and troubles of the world. How do I be a good person? And in that moment, when your kid asks you that question, you do not provide them with some sort of syrupy, trite, oh, honey, don't you worry. It's not just you. You are a good person. Don't say that to that kid. Don't say that to that kid. You will leave them totally alone. If your kid is asking that, you better show up, because the only way that I knew to be with that question is to say, that's the right question, and I'm asking it with you. You're not alone. I'm right here with you. I have no answer, but we're in it together. That. Yeah. So that is the answer to the question on emergence. Thank you for the question. It was a good one. Yeah, here. Well, if you ask, we'll repeat, because we can't share our joint with you. We're so sorry, but it's just for us. Go ahead. Okay. I think I have to give you the joint.
Or come here.
Or come here, yeah. We can bring you in. Then the online people can see you too.
Yes.
Come over here. Yeah.
The joint.
It does look like a joint.
And that whole thing that you shared with us about the clinic and that process of coming out of paralysis, and that very interesting piece about what is the basis of pathology, and the answer in that clinic at that time was, it's my lack of capacity to make sense of my world. So what we're touching tonight is such a radically different way of making sense, you know? And I was sitting there and feeling like the questions that walk us, you know, the questions that everyone has that are bigger than me and they're walking me, and realizing how often I fall into this fairy tale story that when I am a big girl, like when I grow up, then the answer to this question will emerge, right? And everything will make sense. That's not it.
That's not it.
That's a fairy tale. And it creates a lot of suffering. And I could feel as I was feeling you too, all the pressure, like it's a colonized thing. It puts immense pressure on us to believe that wisdom comes in that way. And so I was sitting there sinking down. I felt like the ground was coming up to meet me, and feeling what you were speaking about, what we don't, the knowing the streams of intelligence that are hidden and that need to remain hidden are what will open doorways for us.
Some doors.
Yeah,
And other doorways need to be seen.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But in our culture, I think we're very obsessively attached to the ones that can be seen mostly. And so just feeling what happens in the body when I make room for that which is not visible, touchable. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. Yes. I'm super glad that you noticed. Right? Because I long for this way of, we have no script. We have prepared nothing for you except our entire lives, ancestry, and every other experience that we've ever. And that is the gift. That is all I can give you, is everything I am. Right? And so to be able to explore that and to be in mutual learning, you know, in inquiry together, seems a lot more interesting than just doing a download. Yeah.
And it's interesting to note. So we had Catherine Odora Hoppers here 2 weeks ago, and she had one message for me, which was, and I have it recorded, that when the issue is about life and death, and Catherine has been dealing with issues of life and death in South Africa and in other places around indigenous knowledge systems and confronting colonialism everywhere. But she said, when the issue is life and death, have fun, because that's your only way to survive it, right? And when she said that to me, I was like, how did you do it? Like, how do you do it? She said, I dance. But underneath that fun, there's a seriousness of remaining alive and doing this. And I think in education, we are, and she also says, like, I don't give keynotes, I give life notes. And when I finish my life notes, I say, no questions, because I've already given everything. I've given you the sweat, the tears, the blood, and you want more? And I feel that, like, if I am to have, I'm having fun now. But generally, when you are outside, when you are in a situation where you're trying to cultivate an audience, you have to play to some of the expectations and desires that then bring it back to the translation, right? And that translation then feeds up the same metabolic processes that you've been talking about that are getting unstuck. So in terms of a pathologies, there's a pathology of translation and probably a hunger for the in-depth, indeterminate process that we don't know how to be with anymore, right? Because you're trained, algorithmically trained, to consume according to your preference. So you're approaching this as a consumer. You want what you want and not what's being gifted. And you want to extract from that. So I don't know, maybe it is time for the aunties to reclaim this. And say, excuse me. Because otherwise it's our bodies that get sucked into the extraction again, right? Again and again and again. And we don't have time to talk about it's checkmate time. And we need to figure out this collective pathology, right? Of a crisis of many making. The world is the world exceeds the language, has always done, but right now, particularly. Right now, particularly. And figuring out other process of inquiry that can get us to the dance and there's some word there, and I don't know what, it's a glimmer of different kinds of movement.
That's it. I mean, okay, so you could play back everything we said. We could have a transcript of this conversation. And there's something very, very important that wouldn't be there. And it's that thing. It's the way that you can see when I'm talking, something light up in you. And there's a way in which there's something transpiring between us that we are not even holding, that, and it's alive and it's moving and it's learning and it's shifting and it's changing. And that's what the aunties do. And it's a little bit irreverent. It's a little bit irreverent. And that's a good thing. You know, and like when you were talking about us being at your kitchen table, by the way, we're at time, but when we were at your kitchen table, that this piece of people wandering in and out of the room, the kids, the generations moving in and out of the room, life is taking place while the conversation is happening, while the food is being made, while this is super important. It's not the sacrosanct structure of this where you're pinned in your chair and your back's starting to hurt. There's, you know, you should be folding laundry.
And if you're listening to this,
Yeah,
you should be folding laundry.
I mean, that's the beauty of the Zoom. But that way of actually listening as you're doing, and the learning goes in your body as you're moving. And some pieces you space out and you look out the window and you talk to the children and the dog needs something, but it's coming into your life, not into your brain. And that's, the brain is part of life, but let's don't like have it as a standalone. Right.
Right. Now I just have to ask, Michelle, is it
Okay.
6 or 6:30? 6 o'clock. Okay, so we do need to finish. Okay, to wrap up, I'm gonna just
To wrap up, what are you gonna do to wrap up? I've got a shawl you could wear.
I'm gonna wrap up with that. I'm going to wrap ourselves up. We have been talking about a partnership.
Yeah.
A partnership that gives us the space to do this. That is not the market, because in market we can't.
Probably not too
For-
sellable.
No,
No.
this is not sellable. People, you would lose, you would lose your customers. But here we can still.
Yeah.
The university, I've been saying, okay, I'm gonna go a little bit beyond this, but so there is the mythical figure of the ivory tower. It's a mythical figure that is very problematic, has been always, because it's about dissociation from reality, a tower where the best and the brightest minds would be seeing everything and telling everybody what to do. Super problematic. And still part of the DNA of this, and part of why people come to the university to put their careers in here. So what I'm usually saying now is that the ground is shaking. We're not an ivory tower. We're at best a leaning tower of Pisa, and it's falling. And if it falls hard, it breaks, and then there's a lot of loss. And like, no, it's not what we want. But if it falls softly, it becomes a tree and a nursing log that then stays on the ground where it should be, close to reality. And then the mycelium and the moss are going to start the decomposition into something else, a new soil for something else, right? So in this process, we need to, the first thing is the ability to be present to complexity without freaking out, right? And without having the explosion of the pressure cooker. And if we don't do that quick, we're going to turn on each other. We're already doing that, right? It's happening already. Or we're going to want to withdraw from the world, which is also already happening, right? And that is probably, if you're going to say that's the pathos, that's it. It's the inability to make sense of the world together. Not that we're going to be able to make sense of the world too, because that's putting in language the faith that it can apprehend and it can't.
No, but
right?
it's making.
It's
Not
yes.
made. It's an ongoing.
It's an ongoing thing. It's sense making,
Yeah.
not and dealing with the unknown and the unknowable too. So the matter, the motion, the mystery, back to the whole. So in this process that we're trying to do over here at UVic, would you like to be part of it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. There. Now it's recorded.
No, it's
Yeah.
recorded.
Yeah.
So we're still figuring out how this is going to happen, but one of the things we're trying to do, for example, and we have Kathy here who's been working with this, we're trying to pivot our teacher education programs towards focusing on climate, but not just climate change. Climate is everything, climate, complexity, and relational intelligence.
Mhm.
So if you could be the godmother of the complexity part. Or
we'll
the
do that
climate, yeah, the
together.
climate,
I'm
yeah,
not
no,
gonna
I
do
know,
that
no,
alone.
not alone.
No.
But you could work with our team, right? And have a partnership with the Bateson Institute
Yeah.
so that we can give it our best shot. And we need help with this. We need help in the sense of the recognition that this is a collaborative, collective inquiry. It's not an inquiry of the students. It's not an inquiry of the teacher educators or the teachers. It's something that needs to invite and involve more than one, right? So that it can become combining. So this is one of the things that's happening. I hope that you can join us in this inquiry.
I'm so honored. I'm honored.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to the fun of it.
Yes,
also.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
knowing
I've been
that.
working outside the academy. And I guess in some ways, preparing for this moment of how to have things around the falling tower that can begin to make relationships. So it's kind of perfect. And I love that. And it's been a real joy to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to
Thanks,
those
online
online,
people.
like
Oh,
you're
yeah.
there. Thank you. Whew. Me.